What if the Old West wasn't a land of heroes, but a rough, complicated place where survival mattered more than legend? Westerns love myths, yet every so often a film nails the details, the look, the talk, the grit so perfectly it feels like history itself. These aren't just movies, they're windows into the real frontier. From cattle drives to crumbling towns, each one gets it right in ways you may not expect. Let's dig in. Ride with the Devil, 1999. Ang Lee's Civil War Western doesn't play by Hollywood's usual rules, it plays by history's. Set in Missouri during the Civil War, this film doesn't show you the big battlefields we've all seen before. Instead, it plunges into the smaller, brutal guerrilla conflicts that tore communities apart. What makes it stand out is how obsessively accurate it is. Everything from the long frock coats to the unshaven beards and the exact pistols carried by farm boys is straight out of old photographs. The dialogue feels rustic, formal, and authentic, closer to how people actually spoke in the mid-19th century. Lee even insisted on filming in the real Missouri landscapes where these skirmishes unfolded. That attention to place and atmosphere makes the film feel lived in, not staged. And while the studio pushed for big names like Leonardo DiCaprio or Matt Damon, Lee went with Tobey Maguire. He believed Maguire didn't just act like his character, he believed him, body and soul. The result is a story that captures the excitement of youth diving into war and the crushing reality that follows. It's violent, but not in a flashy way. It shows the harsh truth. Justice was immediate, unforgiving, and survival wasn't guaranteed. Critics called it too bleak, and it never became a box office favorite. But ask historians, and they'll tell you it's one of the closest portrayals to how that part of the war really looked and felt. The Cowboys, 1972. Forget the heroic cowboy myth, this film strips it down to bare-bones reality. Directed by Mark Rydell and starring John Wayne in one of his later roles, The Cowboys shows what it really meant to move cattle across unforgiving terrain after the Civil War. The story follows a rancher forced to hire schoolboys for a cattle drive after his workers abandon him. It sounds like a simple setup, but the film dives deep into the brutal truth of frontier life. The drive isn't just a backdrop for action, it's the story itself. The boys don't become gunslingers overnight. They learn by sweat, fear, and hardship, with every step along the trail shaping them. And when danger strikes, there are no courtroom dramas or second chances. Justice is swift, brutal, and final, exactly how it was for real cattlemen. That raw honesty was shocking to audiences who expected a polished John Wayne adventure. Jerry Goldsmith's haunting score only deepens the sense of grit, echoing the endless plains and the exhausting work of herding livestock day after day. Behind the camera, producer Jay Brooker was making his first big mark, and his commitment to authenticity shows in every frame. Even the landscapes look unforgiving, capturing the sense that the West wasn't some endless playground, it was a fight for survival. The Cowboys didn't leave audiences feeling uplifted. In fact, many walked away unsettled. But that's exactly the point. It refuses to sugarcoat history, and because of that, it stands as one of the most realistic portrayals of cattle drive life ever put on screen. Shane, 1953. Shane may look like a classic Western, but its realism changed Hollywood forever. Based on Jack Schaefer's novel, it tells the story of a retired gunman who tries to settle into quiet farm life only to be pulled back into violence. Director George Stevens wasn't interested in the flashy shootouts of earlier Westerns. He wanted to show the raw force of what pulling a trigger actually meant. Having witnessed combat firsthand in World War II, Stevens brought that knowledge onto the set. He pioneered hidden wire rigs that yanked actors backward when they were struck, creating a shockingly authentic effect for the time. The most famous example is when Jack Palance's character shoots Elisha Cook Jr., a moment critics later called the first truly realistic on-screen death in a Western. It hit audiences like a thunderclap. Jean Arthur came out of retirement to star in the film, a testament to the respect Stevens commanded. And though Schaefer envisioned Shane as darker, he praised the adaptation for staying true to the spirit of his novel. More than just its story, Shane was about showing the West without glamour. The farms look like farms. The clothes are worn and practical, and the fights are messy and terrifying. Stevens understood that the West was not myth, it was survival. And when Shane rides off into the distance, wounded and fading into legend, it sealed the film's reputation as not just a classic, but a turning point in making Westerns more historically grounded. Monte Walsh, 1970. The West wasn't eternal, and Monte Walsh shows us what it looked like when it died. Lee Marvin stars as an aging cowboy, realizing that the world he knew is vanishing. Instead of glorifying gunfights, the film focuses on what happens to men whose way of life is being swept aside by modernization. This is not a story of heroes, it's a story of ordinary cowboys watching the open range vanish. Marvin brings quiet dignity to his role, capturing the sadness of a man who's too stubborn to quit, but too honest to ignore reality. Jack Palance, usually the villain, gives one of his most human performances as Walsh's old friend, their bond carrying the emotional weight of the film. Director William Fraker, better known for cinematography, captured the fading West with a painter's eye. The dusty towns, the empty saloons, and the quiet loneliness feel authentic, because by this point in history, cowboys weren't legends anymore. They were out of work. Critics were split. Gene Siskel dismissed it with 1 star, while Roger Ebert praised it as one of the loveliest westerns he'd seen in years. Audiences didn't flock to it, and the box office disappointed. But today, Monte Walsh stands out for its honesty. It doesn't glorify the cowboy life it shows it ending, and that, in its quiet way, makes it one of the most historically faithful westerns ever filmed. Young Guns, 1988. Don't let the Brat Pack cast fool you, this one's closer to history than you'd think. At first glance, Young Guns looks like a slick teen western, with Emilio Estevez, Kiefer Sutherland, and Lou Diamond Phillips playing outlaw cowboys. But dig deeper, and you'll see something rare. A film that actually respects the real history of Billy the Kid and the Lincoln County War. Screenwriter John Fusco was obsessed with authenticity. He packed the script with verified quotes from Billy himself, lifted straight from historical records. When the studio tried to speed up production details, like the recreation of Billy's famous tintype photo, Fusco fought to keep it accurate. To him, those details mattered, and it shows. The film doesn't paint Billy as a larger-than-life legend, but as a reckless, unpredictable young man caught in the chaos of frontier politics. The Lincoln County War, often romanticized as a simple good versus evil conflict, is shown for what it was: a messy, bloody feud between rival factions that pulled kids into roles they were never prepared for. While some critics dismissed it as a brat pack on horseback, historians like Dr. Paul Hutton later praised it as one of the most accurate portrayals of the era. Sure, the actors looked too polished at times, but the bones of the story, the politics, the betrayals, and Billy's unpredictable charm were right on target. And in a genre full of myths, that's rare. Geronimo, an American Legend, 1993. Few films have tried to tell the Apache story with honesty, but this one went all in. Directed by Walter Hill, with a script co-written by John Milius of Apocalypse Now fame, Geronimo. An American Legend isn't a cheap rehash of cliches. It's a serious attempt at accuracy. From the start, the filmmakers brought in Apache consultants, built entire villages from scratch, and studied original cavalry manuals to get the details right. The uniforms aren't costumes, they're authentic replicas. The actors playing soldiers, trained like real troopers, drilling in formations, learning how to handle equipment the way 19th century cavalry would have. Even the battle scenes were staged, with an eye on realism, avoiding the overblown theatrics that so many westerns fall back on. Wes Studi as Geronimo brought gravity and authenticity, while Jason Patric, Gene Hackman, and Robert Duvall filled out a cast that gave the story weight. Despite this, the movie struggled at the box office. Why timing? Just days before its release, a made-for-television version of Geronimo aired for free. By the time this film hit theaters, audiences felt they had already seen the story. But accuracy is where Geronimo shines. From Apache war regalia to the political betrayals that shaped the conflicts, the film refuses to glamorize or oversimplify. Quentin Tarantino even praised it as a really great classic western that audiences didn't appreciate. Today, it stands as one of the most painstakingly researched portrayals of Native and U.S. frontier history ever put to film. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, 2007. This isn't just a Western, it's a time machine into the 1880s. Directed by Andrew Dominik and starring Brad Pitt as Jesse James, this film recreates the outlaw's final days with stunning precision. Everything from the clothing to the locations was obsessively researched. The cinematography by Roger Deakins captures the landscapes in a way that feels almost like a daguerreotype brought to life. What sets it apart is the involvement of Ron Hansen, the novelist whose book inspired the film. Hansen, a recognized expert on the Old West, served as a consultant during filming. He wasn't just in the background, he appeared on screen in a cameo as a reporter and declared the screenplay completely faithful to his work. That kind of endorsement is rare when authors talk about Hollywood adaptations. The pace is slow, yes, but it mirrors the reality of life in the 1880s, long stretches of silence, broken by sudden moments of violence. Even the guns are portrayed with care, each model accurate to the period, each scene staged to reflect the awkwardness of real shootouts rather than cinematic ballets. Financially, it didn't soar. A nearly 3-hour meditation with a long title was never going to dominate the box office. But artistically, it's a landmark. Morgan Freeman once said he was stunned by its attention to detail, finding himself rewinding scenes just to soak in the craftsmanship. For pure historical texture, this might be as close as you'll ever get to living inside the legend and the reality of Jesse James. Heaven's Gate, 1980. The film that destroyed a studio also delivered one of the most detailed recreations of frontier life ever seen. After The Deer Hunter won Best Picture, director Michael Cimino was handed a blank check for his next project. What followed was production chaos, a budget that ballooned from $11 million to over 40, endless takes, and entire sets rebuilt because Cimino didn't think they looked right. But here's the thing. When you look past the financial disaster, Heaven's Gate is breathtaking in its authenticity. Cimino didn't just want a Western. He wanted a portrait of the Johnson County War, where immigrant farmers clashed with powerful cattle barons. Entire immigrant villages were recreated down to the stitching on the clothes. Cimino even hauled a full-size train over a mountain in pieces just to rebuild it for one jaw-dropping sequence. The battle scenes are staged with hundreds of extras, all dressed in period-accurate clothing, giving the film an overwhelming sense of scale. Chris Christopherson, who starred in the film, later defended it as a beautiful piece of work that audiences weren't ready for. Yes, the production excess nearly sank United Artists, and critics at the time tore it apart. But look again today, and you'll see a Western that captures the complexity of frontier society more honestly than almost any before it. Heaven's Gate may have been a box office failure, but as a historical document, it's astonishing. McCabe and Mrs. Miller, 1971. Robert Altman's anti-Western doesn't celebrate frontier myths, it dismantles them. From the opening scene, you know this isn't Hollywood's West. The town isn't a pristine set. Roofs are half-built, walls are unfinished. Characters shiver in cold saloons where you can literally see their breath. This isn't the polished myth of John Wayne. It's the mud, cold, and struggle of real life. Warren Beatty plays McCabe, a gambler turned businessman, while Julie Christie's Mrs. Miller brings sharpness and heart. Their relationship is grounded, flawed, and painfully human, more reflective of real partnerships than the Hollywood romances of earlier Westerns. Altman leaned into realism in small but powerful ways. One memorable moment has Beatty's character sewing his own shirt, a tiny act that says more about daily frontier life than a dozen shootouts ever could. The film is full of those details, showing the West as unfinished, uncertain, and unforgiving. Critics didn't know what to make of it at first. It was too slow, too bleak, too different from the heroic cowboy narrative. But over time, it's been hailed as one of the greatest Westerns ever made. Roger Ebert called it one of the saddest films I have ever seen, praising its sense of longing for love and home in a world where those things were fleeting. McCabe and Mrs. Miller proves that accuracy doesn't have to come from grand battles. Sometimes it's in the mud under your boots, the frost on the window, and the quiet desperation of ordinary lives. The Alamo, 2004. Most films about the Alamo romanticize the story. This one strips it down. Directed by John Lee Hancock and produced by Disney, this version came with a massive $17 million budget, making it the most expensive set ever built in North America at the time. The production went out of its way to get the details right. The real ages of the figures, our accurate Davy Crockett isn't portrayed as a grizzled old man, but closer to the actual age he was at the time. The clothing, the cannons, the Texian defenses, even the timeline of the final attack were all handled with unusual precision. The climactic battle doesn't drag on for half the movie. It unfolds quickly, in the pre-dawn hours, and ends in under 20 minutes, just like it really did. The film also captures the tension of waiting. For 2 long weeks, defenders held their ground, fully aware that the odds of survival were slim. That sense of dread and inevitability comes through, creating a mood that feels truer to history than the larger-than-life portrayals that came before. Critics were divided, and its release was overshadowed by the juggernaut success of The Passion of the Christ, leading to disappointing box office numbers. But Roger Ebert defended it, calling it a film that captured the loneliness and fear of men waiting for certain defeat. The Alamo may not have been a financial hit, but as far as authenticity goes, it stands as one of the most faithful depictions of that fateful battle. Ulzana's Raid, 1972. If you want a Western that feels uncomfortably real, this is it. Ulzana's Raid, directed by Robert Aldrich and starring Burt Lancaster, avoids the polished cowboy cliches and dives headfirst into the gritty chaos of frontier conflict. Lancaster plays a seasoned scout, a character based on real-life frontiersman Al Sieber, whose experiences inspired countless Western archetypes going back to James Fenimore Cooper. What makes this film different is tone. It doesn't romanticize. It doesn't exaggerate. Instead, it shows a violent clash of cultures with the rawness that many Hollywood Westerns softened. Alan Sharp's screenplay grounds every scene in authenticity, from the weary cavalry officers to the way survival often depended on reading the land better than your opponent. The film's realism impressed more than just historians. Quentin Tarantino has repeatedly called Ulzana's Raid his favorite Western of the 1970s, praising its uncompromising honesty. Watching it, you understand why. The tension is not theatrical. It feels lived in, unpredictable, and frightening. At the time of release, critics were split. Some found it too bleak, too unsettling. But today, it stands tall as one of the most historically faithful portrayals of frontier scouts and the reality of 19th century campaigns. If you're tired of the glossy cowboy myth, Ulzana's Raid is the antidote. How the West Was Won, 1962. This isn't one Western, it's 5 films stitched into one sweeping epic. With 3 directors, George Marshall, Henry Hathaway, and John Ford at the helm, How the West Was Won set out to capture half a century of American frontier history. From riverboats and wagon trains to buffalo hunters and the rise of railroads, it's all here, shown with a dedication to scale and accuracy. The production used Cinerama, a 3-camera process that created an ultra-wide image, immersing viewers like never before. It also brought in 12,000 extras, including real native tribes, to give the massive battle and migration scenes an authenticity that CGI today still struggles to match. The detail work is staggering. Wagon train sequences feel exactly like diaries from the era. Railroad camps look lived in, chaotic, and dirty, not shiny backlot sets. Even the costumes evolved with the timeline, showing how fashion shifted over 5 decades. Audiences loved it. In fact, it was the second highest-grossing film of 1963, right behind Cleopatra. The difference? Cleopatra nearly bankrupted its studio, while How the West Was Won actually made money. More importantly, it made history come alive, not through myth-making, but through detail and scale. Open Range, 2003. Kevin Costner knew one thing when making Open Range. Cattle drives weren't glamorous. They were exhausting. This film brings a slow, deliberate realism to the screen, showing cowboys as working men living with mud, rain, and constant fatigue. Robert Duvall's performance as Boss Spearman captures the tough dignity of an old hand who values fairness more than glory. The film takes its time, letting you feel the weight of open grazing life, from the long, backbreaking drives to the vulnerability of small ranches under threat. The clothing looks worn, the towns feel raw and unfinished, and the landscapes aren't just backdrops, they're part of the struggle. Costner, both directing and starring, insisted on keeping things authentic, even in the action. Instead of stylized showdowns, confrontations are chaotic, clumsy, and terrifying, closer to what real frontier disputes would have felt like. And while Hollywood often paints cowboys as romantic loners, here they're shown as men bound by trust, responsibility, and survival. Open Range was praised for its realism, and it gave audiences a rare look at the actual grit of cattle life. By refusing to sugarcoat, it reminded everyone that being a cowboy was a job, one of the toughest jobs in American history. Meek's Cutoff, 2010. Most westerns move fast. This one moves at the speed of history itself. Directed by Kelly Reichardt, Meek's Cutoff is a minimalist, almost meditative film about a group of settlers lost on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. Don't expect flashy shootouts or sweeping cavalry charges. Instead, this film locks you into the slow, grinding reality of pioneer life. The costumes were handmade using authentic 19th century techniques, right down to the dyes and stitching. The wagons weren't replicas, they were real, built and pulled across the desert exactly as they would have been. Even the sound design reflects the silence of endless plains, broken only by the creak of wood and the crunch of footsteps. Michelle Williams leads the cast, but it's the atmosphere that steals the show. You feel the thirst, the fatigue, and the quiet desperation of families trapped between trust in their guide and the terrifying possibility he has no idea where he's going. Some viewers found it too slow, too uneventful. But that's the point. Life on the trail wasn't fast or glamorous. It was endless waiting, endless uncertainty, and a constant fight against the land itself. Meek's Cutoff captures that better than almost any Western ever made. The Revenant, 2015. It may lean into survival horror, but The Revenant is rooted in real history. Alejandro G. Iñárritu's brutal epic about frontiersman Hugh Glass isn't just about one man's ordeal. It's a meticulously researched portrait of the fur trade in the early 19th century. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance got the headlines. But the real star is the production design. Costumes were crafted to match authentic trapping gear. Camps, boats, and outposts were reconstructed using period techniques. Even the landscapes filmed in freezing, unforgiving locations echo the journals of real trappers who described the wilderness as both breathtaking and merciless. The film famously used only natural light for outdoor shots, creating a haunting realism that makes you feel the cold in your bones. And while Glass's legendary survival tale is dramatized, the world around him is astonishingly accurate to the era. From the interactions between native tribes and trappers to the sheer danger of river travel, it all comes across as lived history. The Revenant may be remembered for its awards, but at its core, it's a history lesson disguised as an adventure. Watching it, you don't just see the past, you feel it. The West was never clean or simple. It was gritty, unforgiving, and far stranger than the myths. These 15 films prove that when filmmakers chase history instead of legend, the stories hit harder and last longer. Now the question is yours. Do you want your Westerns raw and real, or polished and mythic? Share your take in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and ride with us for more untold stories from movie history.